So good to see you, Sheila.
Nice to see you.
This is very exciting. So I had asked if you would read a little short bit from Open Secrets, and that will maybe sort of set at least one part of the suspenseful narrative to for us to begin talking. So go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'm going to read, following a suggestion by Sheridan, a chapter that, well, just part of a chapter that is in the mind of the husband, who is called Michel. It's a French name, so that's pronounced Michel, but it's a man. And he is meeting a Russian who is one of his clients. One of the themes of this book that runs through it is the question of money, which sort of many of the elements of this book turn around. I don't think I need to embroider on that. I think you'll be able to follow. So this is Michel. They're going sailing. He's offered to take the Russian sailing in order to distract him, because the Russian has asked for his money back. And this is going to be very difficult for Michel. They meet at the dock at 9. The Russian is waiting for him at the entrance to the marina. Michel leads him directly to the boat. There she is, he says, indicating it and smiling. Somehow just seeing the smooth shape of the white boat reassures him, makes him think for a moment, all will be well. The sun is already strong, though there's hardly any wind. The Russian stands looking at the boat, admiring it. Beautiful, he says. A swan? Michel nods his head. 45 feet, he says proudly, not mentioning that the boat belongs to the bank. He jumps on board and reaches out a hand to the Russian. Let's go, he says. The sooner they get underway, the better. He doesn't want the Russian asking him to produce his millions in cash immediately. The Russian, who wears a white cap pulled down low over his forehead and fancy sunglasses, climbs aboard easily and helps with the unfastening of the ropes. An agile man. He seems to know what he's doing, laughing and pushing off, then jumping easily down the steps into the cabin to find a glass of wine, as though he owns the boat as it leaves the shore. There's no wind, the sea slick and calm, the heat rising, a brilliant, still, late August morning. Michel is obliged to start the motor. The Russian is smiling, sipping as he watches Michel closely. He compliments him on his skill with the handling of the boat. He's all charm today. In an expansive mood, he expects, obviously in his arrogance, that Michel is bringing him the original amount of his ill-gotten gains. Michel understands it must be difficult for this man to imagine anyone would not do what he wants them to do. Basically, he can only understand two responses to his demands. Yes, sir, and no, sir, the latter of which will get you killed immediately. Michel is aware as he pilots the boat away from the shore. Despite everything, there's the familiar thrill of moving fast over the water, watching the shore slowly disappear, the expanse of sea and sky and sun opening up before them. Freedom. The Russian lies out flat on his back, his cap over his face. He seems to be asleep. After a while, as the wind lifts, Michel shuts off the motor, hoists the jib, and they progress rapidly across the sea he knows so well. Somehow Michel feels safer the farther they are from the shore, from other people, from civilization. It always seems a miracle to him that the wild wind can be harnessed by a sail and a tiller and directed to carry him wherever he wishes to go. Eventually, the Russian sits up and suggests they take a dip. Why not, Michel says. He loosens the sails, throws down the anchor in the clear turquoise sea, puts down the ladder. The wind is picking up, the surface of the water choppy. Michel lets the Russian change first in the small cabin, not wanting the intimacy in close quarters. As he changes, he looks at the Russian's heavy gold watch, his thick wallet, his cell phone on the shiny table. Then they stand side by side on the deck in their bathing suits, gazing down at the water. Michel glances at the Russian's strong legs, his smooth, hairless chest, not much broader than his own. He realizes that in some kind of tussle or fight, they would be evenly matched. The wind begins to blow hard suddenly, the way it does sometimes here. Is this wise? The Russian asks, glancing at Michel. Michel is not worried. This is his domain, the place where he's most at home. Besides, what's he got to lose? No problems, he says and smiles. The Russian says something Michel cannot quite catch, something ironic, nasty, about his expert skill as a sailor compared to that as a banker. Then he says, now I understand how the Swiss banks work. No names on any of the transactions, which means you take a profit when there is a profit. But if things go down, it's the client that pays. That's not going to work with me, I'm afraid. Michel considers a response in kind, saying something about his reluctance to deal with Russian gangsters. But what purpose would it serve? The wind is beating the loose sails against the mast, the waves breaking against the boat.
Thanks so much. That's a great setup. But that comes about about the first 30 pages in. So certain other things have happened before then. But the reason that I wanted you to read that just as a way to begin is because it is so current, and it sets up, Russians and Russian money and dirty money and Russian oligarchs have become a kind of shorthand for us, and what it does in the novel is very quickly sort of and efficiently set up a kind of theme of a certain level of corruption, and so I know from the acknowledgements that you had read a number of books about Vladimir Putin, and you thank Masha Gessen who I know has written a biography of Putin. And so can you just talk a little bit about, of course, as a device, it's incredibly effective, but I just wonder what drew you to that initially.
Yes. I have to admit, I've been interested in Russia since I was a teenager, and started, of course, with the books. And I think as a teenager, probably Dostoevsky's the best of writers to turn to. And I could still remember, copying out great passages from the brothers Karamazov, which I led a reading group at the Center for Fiction on. But, with Ivan's speeches about evil, how if there is an omnipotent God, and if the God is good, how can suffering occur? So that was sort of where I came in with the Russians. Then I have to say that I did, have my first husband was a Russian origin, very charming, very intelligent man. We were married very, very young. But I also learned, about the ups and downs of Russian characters. Yes, great swings of mood. And I think that is probably something. So I was interested. And then, of course, when I was writing this, all of this was going on in America, where we had, this, one of these books that I read, really caused collusion, and the whole story of the Trump Russia and Putin, and one has to say that almost sort of feeling that you do have when you see Trump on the television with Putin, that he is very respectful, extremely respectful of him, and that perhaps Putin does know something. I think Putin is a very intelligent man, and you're right. I did read a book. When I was looking for it in the house today, but I couldn't find it. But it's Putin in his own words. It's not an autobiography, but he's being questioned by two journalists who are very kind and ask him the right questions. And we really learned
as if they had any choice.
and not about his childhood and his. There's one scene which is really interesting where he goes to the KGB. This is Putin, goes to the KGB and says, "I want to be a spy." He's read the Sword and the Shield or some books about spying and be a spy. So he goes there and they say, "Well, sorry, he's like a high school student at this point. You've got to first get a law degree." So he gets a law degree, and of course he does become a KGB operative. And then there's the problem at the end of the Soviet Union of what he's going to do with all of this. So there were all kinds of things going on. So Russia is one of the threads in the book. And I thank you for bringing that up, because it certainly is topical. We still have those questions. What about the Steele dossier? What about, there's so many things that we don't actually, is it possible that, Trump and went with his wife and slept in the bed that Obama had been in with Michelle and did other things on the bed? I don't know. It's a thread through the novel, because of your interest, but it's always wonderful when your interest dovetails with something very effective. And so, Michel asked himself at one point, when the Russian has told him that he was a spy, how different is a spy from a Swiss banker? And so, of course, it is current, but it also sort of sets up money as this an ambivalence about money and the link between corruption and money, ideas of the danger of money, which of course then sets up ideas of safety, and the idea that money is linked to people who are essentially lethal. So I just wonder too, as the sort of the Russian theme kind of dovetails into questions about money and the ambivalence and ambivalence towards money, because these people are living in extraordinarily rarefied existence, but it has spared them nothing in terms of suffering, interestingly. And they all seem rather Alice is our protagonist, her husband Michel. They have a 14-year-old daughter, Pamela, and then Alice has a sister, Lizzie, who is involved with another Russian, a slightly more benign Russian, in New York. So we move between the French Riviera, Amagansett, and Switzerland, where the daughter is in boarding school, just to set it up for everybody. So this is a very rarefied world, but there is this undercurrent of corruption and of violence. And yes.
and they are counterpoints to each other. So I assume that was entirely deliberate on your part.
Well, it's hard to say what's deliberate, as you know very well when you're writing a book. I think the spark initially, I wanted to write a book about these girls, and I think at one point I had actually 4 of them, 4 sisters, who come back to the house where when the parents are no more, and they all have various stories to tell, of course. And there I have to say, and some of the maybe in my audience tonight may have read with me Le Toutonnier, the Colette novella, which is about that, these sisters coming back to a house and where they have been girls. So there's this kind of idea of that at one point. And then as you know, I had written a memoir before this about my sister and about her death. And so there is this idea, I think, of when you talk about this beautiful place, and it is a beautiful place. Amagansett is a beautiful place, and of course the French Riviera too. But underneath there is this undercurrent of corruption and violence. And I think that was the world that, in a way, I was brought up in South Africa, which is such a beautiful country, and some of you may know it. But underneath there was always this undercurrent of great injustice and of an abuse of power. So this comes also from my own sister's story, and the Swiss banking idea came from that, because my sister, who I believe really was killed by her husband, who was driving the car, and there was no other reason for the car to go off the road, except there had been a history of battering. But she did have money in Switzerland in a numbered account, and there was a question. First, the husband had stolen it and put it in his own numbered account and knew the number, and then her accountant had stolen it back. It's just incredible stories. But all of this, in a way, was made possible by the Swiss banking system, which started out, in an effort to, it's been explained in the book, the father tells the little girl it was during the war. Yeah. It was in order to hide the Jews' money and keep it safe for them. Well, I don't know how much, ambivalent, ambiguous anyway situation. And certainly my sister's money never, ever reappeared. And the number was not known, or the name. And then I have to admit that, how all these things, these threads, that another book I read, Colette being very important, was also Jennifer Egan's Manhattan Beach, where a child is in a way privy to information, or you could think of the film Witness, which is one of those,
or sort of What Made You Knew kind of thing. Yeah,
where the child actually has the information that everybody else wants. And it's, this was what was going on with my sister's money, in the sense that they were looking for somebody who could tell them where, what was the name, what was the number. And in this case, the little girl has this information. So that, increases, keeps the tension mounting.
Sure.
And yeah.
Well, it's also, it's something that is characteristic in your work, but it's in particular in Open Secrets, that class and privilege and that money goes along with or doesn't, but in any case, that class and privilege are a kind of camouflage. But it's, what transpires is that it is just camouflage, and that what it's masking is characteristics as venal as anybody else, who has the absence of this particular class and privilege until it is exposed. And one of the processes of the unfolding of the plot is the nature of that venality, and how thin is that camouflage and the veneer of even sophistication.
Yes, and there are various betrayals, of course, and so
yes, that's what I was talking about.
both on the part of men and on the part of the women. The women are not angels in this either.
Right.
And they also do retaliate. So I wanted to have that. And Lizzie, who is the younger sister, the two girls here, she also is capable of reacting with violence. And so we, have tried to, I must say, to come back to the Russians, though, the Russians, and I'm sure there are a lot of writers here listening to us tonight, the Russians are great plotters.
Right.
And I must say that I learned a great deal, and you will say, but goodness, this little slim book. But I did learn a great deal just reading, and I did that with a reading group, reading War and Peace. And the way that Tolstoy sort of picks up a character, drops it, brings in another, leaves them always at a point, at a very exciting moment, and then brings in somebody else and braids all of these threads together so that they ultimately mean something by the end of the story.
Yeah, there's something. Can we just stay with betrayal though for a second, because it's such a good device also, and one that is so sort of true to life. And as you say, actually the novel begins with the uncovering of a betrayal. So it very much sets the plot in motion. But at one point, Michel thinks to himself in relation to a betrayal of he has been betrayed. He says to himself, how little we know about ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I wondered if another kind of betrayal that you were really interested in was the sort of notion of self-betrayal, that in a sense that one can be living the wrong life. Mm-hmm. And how do you remedy that? How do you fix that you have landed on sort of as perfect and as beautiful,
Yes, I think that was definitely another theme in the book, and not that I started out with a theme, but that one discovers in the writing, and that is about who are these people? Who am I? How do you find out who you are? And particularly growing up in, as I said, in South Africa and in a family where there were secrets, a lot of secrets. And my mother, of course, and I've written about this in many, many places, my mother was a drinker, but nobody ever mentioned that. So it was very mysterious to us that at times she would just drop from her chair, or she might fall asleep with, the cigarette burning down, and some servant would have to come and, but no explanation. And I can still remember having the conversation with another girl at school, we were sent to boarding school, and saying, well, I think my mother may be mad. That was the only thing I could think of. But it was not the case. Not the case. If there's this underlying secret that is never explained to a child, I think it's extremely confusing for you then to discover who you are. And so this theme of identity, of who I am, and of course it's Michel's case too. Who is he? And with this analogy with being a spy, and I suppose I was thinking about that today too. I suppose as a writer, one is something of a spy too.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes, you're looking, you're watching, you're learning, you're trying to discover the character on the page, as well as, of course, who are you? And I don't know whether, Sheridan, you felt this too, you come from the colonies, who are you? Are you English? Born in South African? What does that mean? Who am I? When it's the poetry that you read, the snow is falling.
It's all out of order, and in fact, that's it's all out of order. And you're supposed to memorize poems about the autumn or something, and there's certainly no autumn. There's not even deciduous trees. But Yeah, and you're linking that with your mother is very interesting, because of course when you're speaking of not being able to understand something like alcoholism, is what you're really describing is an absence, right? There's just an absence.
Yeah.
So you're feeling it, which of course is, it's kind of what writing is as well, right? Addressing an absence, over and over again. But I was thinking, when I was thinking today, when I reread the novel again, I was thinking of Seduction and Betrayal, that wonderful essay by Elizabeth Hardwick. I don't know if you know it, but she has a book that's called Seduction and Betrayal. But the essay in that is she's not really talking very much about contemporary fiction, but when she does, what she says is that the act that is illicit now in contemporary fiction is more of a psychological drama than a moral one. Mm-hmm. That betrayal and that illicit things, they depend on a certain kind of structure, whether it's, in this case, it's a kind of bourgeois way of living, that heightens the betrayal, and it triggers a kind of psychological response in Michelle. And when I was thinking about your memoir, what I was thinking about is that betrayal is so transformative, and of course so is grief. So in fiction, it allows you somewhere to go for the character to really fundamentally change, and it can be a prompt. Betrayal and grief can be a prompt to a sort of almost like a personal liberation, in a sense, And I wonder what you think about that.
Yes, absolutely, it can. But I think that was a very interesting idea, but to equate absence with what happened with, for example, with my mother. For me, it was an absence. And that's something that stays with you forever. And certainly in this book, there are important absences. Mm-hmm. There's Michelle, of course, who disappears from the life of the family. And the little girl who has to face her own, the absence of the entire family. So these things are, and what happens to these people, and how do they deal with this? And perhaps I don't want to give away too much of the plot.
No, you can't talk about
anyway, hopefully our listeners will be able to answer better than I can.
Because the book is very suspenseful, and actually that was a question that I had. How difficult was it to plot? Because you're using some kind of genre techniques, and for the writers there, I would identify them as very short chapters, multiple points of view. So we're shifting from first person consistently, but quickly, and quickly in, and then, not exactly cliffhanger endings, but in some instances, absolutely. And that these are all sort of techniques of a genre novel, but it's not a genre novel. It's not a, I actually saw it shelved in my local bookstore in the mystery section, and I thought that they must take that out of there and put it in literary fiction, because it doesn't, really belong there. And so, I had a question about, how difficult it was to plot it, and whether you had models in mind, because I know you've been compared to Patricia Highsmith in this sense.
Yes.
And I was thinking also, though, which is not in that suspenseful mode, of Shirley Hazard. I was thinking of also.
Wonderful. She's wonderful. Yes, I don't know. It's hard to think back, but I did. I had some wonderful readers too. And one is Jonathan Sandloffer, who read this at an early stage and said, and got rid of some of the sisters. He said, maybe you've got too many sisters. So there was that. My agent read it very carefully, and I think tried to make the dialogue more contemporary. And I think she worked harder on this book than she has on any of the others, which she's usually been very hands-off from that point of view. And then I had these wonderful editors, of course, at Penguin, who, were extremely helpful. And then I had my family too, and I have a family of writers, and who, will tell you, and the grandchildren. This time I would, because having written a memoir, I thought this time I don't want to offend anyone. Because, you put your life into it. So I sat them around the dining room table out here and had two of the granddaughters and the three girls at some point anyway read it. Nobody found anything of themselves in the book at all, which was very funny because they are in it. But my harshest critic was the youngest granddaughter, who was very harsh and had many things to tell.
She? How old is she?
Very helpful. Your harshest critic is very good. But anyway, and the age of the Pamela.
Of Pamela.
Yes,
14.
People felt that because she was initially 12, and the book also started further in. It started when the girls arrived back at the house, and the rest is was flashback. So I chronologically started it earlier in with the betrayal scene that starts the book. So there were, reworking, reshufflings. I can't tell you. Yes.
Sorry, I was just going to say what's so interesting about beginning a book with the betrayal is that you don't ever necessarily know this from the outset, but it is actually a kind of classic trope because it's a break, right? It's a break, and the rest of the novel is the mending in story of a break,
But, I'm afraid these things come, and I think actually one of the ways that the best way for a plot to come is from the unconscious mind.
Of course.
Obviously, one is putting together your life, what you read, what people suggested, all kinds of different things are going on. But ultimately, the plot has to really come from some other place. And it's perhaps the least contrived thing, anyway, for me. I mean, I try to, show the students how I plot with the columns and the names up the top and all the various devices, that to give myself the illusion, probably, that I'm actually plotting this thing out.
Well, it's the freedom that you have to find the freedom in the form, right? You just
maybe yes. And I have used short chapters, and sometimes with headings, like with cracks. I think I did that. In fact, I used little bits of doggerel up the top, little verse business. The
other device that I think you use really, really well in Open Secrets for writers who are listening is the rhetorical question that a character will ask themselves in the middle of the body of a paragraph, and not only does it reiterate as a question motivation, where the plot is, what they're thinking, but they can be questioning themselves, how could I be thinking this? Was this the right thing to do? Surely she will be okay, but I mean, it's a really underrated device that actually drives the plot forward.
Yeah. Well, I'm afraid that's a little bit my own mind. I'm always doing that. My husband does not do that at all. He's so lucky. I think he's.
But he doesn't write fiction.
I'm always thinking, oh, why did I say that? And when I go to bed tonight, I undoubtedly will wake up and think, oh, how could I have said that? Or I should have said that. Or that's the way my mind works. Unfortunately, it's
well.
Not
getting back to what you were talking about the value of the unconscious and just letting. And this is something that I think that you have always talked about and written about, and it was very profoundly examined in your memoir, Once We Were Sisters. There is the repetition of a pattern, and you said, of course, the sisters haunt your work, and there's the absence of your sister. You're writing into the person shape that was left with the death of your sister. But in Once We Were Sisters, you said, so many versions of the truth are possible, which enable me to tell the same story different ways. And this kind of unconscious returning to the material looks very different to a reader, but not to you.
Yes, no. And after a while too, and I think I mentioned that too in my memoir, and I'm sure you've had this experience, is that when you have used your life in fiction or in nonfiction and you've written it down, it's the fiction that replaces the reality, so that you don't know anymore what actually happened. And I have a scene in the memoir where, and I say, I don't know whether it was my sister or I was the one who went into the room and saw my father lying there dead. Now, was it my sister? And then she came back and told me. I think that's where it happened, but it might have been that I was the one who saw it, because we were so, into, and this is this question of identity and of taking somebody else's place, which is something that I've written about too before, in Bay of the Foxes, for example, which was a book that had many of my books have these mystery elements or crime elements in them, if you will. But there was also.
I wondered, Sheila, if when you wrote the memoir, because you were identifying, even if you couldn't, and even if you were, misremembering, so to speak. I wonder if that changed writing the memoirs, writing it straight, so to speak, finally, after what, 12 books of circling around this material in many, many different forms, in many, many different ways, many short stories that pick up different threads, whether writing it straight in a memoir form changed at all how you write fiction.
Yeah, maybe a little bit, because I've been writing quite a few essays too, and wrote a blog. I don't do it as much as I should, but for Psychology Today, yes, I have to remind myself that I should go back and write one. You're supposed to do at least one a month, and I haven't. But anyway, yes, I think I have sort of turned more to nonfiction in a way, and perhaps that came from writing the memoir and getting the wonderful thing about memoir is that one has immediate response from your readers who then tell you their stories, and that's always very touching. I mean, sometimes it's a little awkward if you're in a bookstore or something and signing books, and somebody comes up and says, and tells you, or right there, some terrible thing, and then what do you say and how do you comfort them and move on to sign the next book? So but it's a wonderful way, and I had so many people who wrote to me and told me things that I didn't know too. Do you know that they knew?
Yes, of course, right. Yeah, that's a great way to find things out. But that just extends the story then, right?
Yes. It does. I think you can write it again. I could write it again. I could write it 101 times because there was such a mystery to it for me. and I could
Well,
never.
I have to say also too in that regard that, and this is something that you probably can't necessarily recognize when you're reading your own work, but there's a kind of submerged anguish to your prose, even in its most sort of elegant and sparkling. There's a kind of submerged anguish between your writing that is its own kind of suspense. You know, there's something.
There's something with the anguish. Something.
What?
I'd be happy to be able to do something with the anguish, right? Something that.
Well, yeah. But it makes for a kind of an attenuated emotional. It is in and of itself suspenseful.
Well, I suppose if you portray people who are really in a difficult situation of one kind or another, it is. I mean, always when I do a lecture on suspense, how to create suspense, and one of them, my number one is put a vulnerable creature in a dangerous situation. And so if you think about it, we're all vulnerable creatures, right? And we're almost always, particularly now, today, with what's going on around us in the world today, we're in a dangerous situation.
It peels everything away. It peels it all away. And leaves us where, like a snail's eye, retracting,
Right.
And in Open Secrets, the most vulnerable creature is the 14-year-old Pamela, and I'm worried about her, Sheila. I'm worried about her, and I think that maybe Pamela needs to grow up a little bit and have her own novel.
That would be good. I am writing at the moment, not about Pamela, but I'm writing about two girls who are, one is 14 and one is 15, and their situation in Paris in the 60s, actually. And it's certainly, and in between the memoir and this Open Secrets, I wrote a book which only part of appeared in Jonathan Sandloffer put out an anthology, It Occurs to Me, I Am American, or I'm America, I think that's the title. And he published a little bit of it. But the rest, it's the story of Sonia, you'll remember the prostitute in Crime and Punishment. Sonia's story, because I felt she never really she's so good, such an angel. She didn't really get to tell her story. So I tried to write it, but it has not yet found. It's one of those books that remained in the drawer.
Tell me about it. Well, I'm thinking that Melanie told me that I should look to ask for questions towards the end. So if anybody has any questions, they're just saying nice things, Sheila.
No. And about you too.
Well, there's nothing. So yes, don't be shy. There's nothing. There's nothing wrong with asking questions. But I wanted to say while we're waiting for a question that I sat down and I was thinking about all of the repeated patterns in. I think I've read probably 5 of your novels and the memoir, and so it seemed to me. So here's my list of evocative. Any one of them would lead off onto a story, but you merge them all, and they return in completely different guises. So orphaned sisters or the early death of parents. Well, there's your vulnerability. Girls in peril, sisters who can't be reached at crucial moments, missed connections, women who are betrayed and betraying, dangerous men, odd female teachers or authority figures who are completely irresponsible. A gilded lifestyle that spares the characters nothing in terms of suffering. And similarly, the intelligence of the girls doesn't prevent them from misreading other people. And that sort of, there's a theme of that there's no certainty in knowledge, that it doesn't matter how sort of prepared you imagine yourself to be.
Yes.
The world is completely uncertain, and open secrets. That's part of the themes also too. The uncertainty of it.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
And here we are in uncertain times.
Yes, I think I don't know. It's very hard to say how all of this gets braided together, but we were talking a little bit about Russia and America, and I was thinking about that. And so often one thinks of them as being very different, but they're not really all that different. And if you think of the Emancipation Proclamation in America, which was 1863, right? And in Russia, you had the freeing of the serfs in 1861. And then this was Alexander II, who was the good Tsar, right? Who freed the serfs and established the right trial by jury, and you have Lincoln here, and both of those men were, of course, destroyed. Alexander II, the good Tsar, was blown up in 1881, and Lincoln, of course, was shot. So it's something to think of, these two countries sort of grappling with democracy in a way, and what has happened to them along the way. And
you actually have Michelle say, it's not democracy, it's hypocrisy.
Yes,
right?
I do. Yeah. Thank you for reading so carefully, Sheridan. Yes, it does. And it's about money, of course, because, this is true. America has, complained about money going abroad, rightly so, but then they are willing to take other people's money too and put it in various places and hide it from people. Hidden money, taxes not paid, these kind of things. But little by little, there perhaps our technology is going to help us, because our secrets will be very difficult to keep. They've already become more and more difficult.
Yes, and the perniciousness of secrets and secrecy is that's another thematic thing. So let me look at these questions. Somebody says, Nick says, I would like to hear both of you think a bit more about whether a book like this begins with plot, that is, as a story, or with themes and ideas. How do these two things help create a large fiction?
Oh, plot? Yes, no, yes. I never start with a theme, or I start, with characters or an image or something of that kind, and I don't know where I'm going initially. And that's the way I do it. But, I had this discussion a couple of nights ago with Joyce Carol Oates, and she said she never starts before she's taken a huge amount of notes, and I think probably plotted the whole thing out maybe before she even begins. But I don't do it that way. I have to sort of allow myself that moment of freedom to get down whatever it is that is there. Right. And it seems to me that when I read the great writers, and when you read the text, you have this feeling of great freedom. They seem to allow themselves to say, whatever they want to say, and at the same time, complete control. So I think you need to be able to do both at some point. At some point, you have got to go back and make sure that everything that you have there is leading you to your ultimate conclusion.
Right.
Like, take it out. You know, the gun, it's the
Right.
old thing that the gun's got to be there in the first
Right.
act, it's got to go off in the third. Yeah. I don't
Right.
know what your
My friend Judy Rowley asked, and I know this is coming from Australia, how difficult, Sheila, is it for you to shift between nonfiction and fiction? Or maybe how easy is it?
Well, I do find nonfiction is harder, I think, because you have to respect the truth. I mean, obviously, the truth is a big word because, you know, what is the truth? Is one able to know the truth? It's your version, anyway, of the truth. But still, I still feel that you need to respect that. And even, you know, writing historical fiction, I've done quite a bit of that. I would not falsify the actual facts. You know, but whereas there are writers like John Coetzee, who wrote The Master of St. Petersburg, and, you know, he has Dostoevsky in a terrible state over the death of his stepson. And of course, the stepson actually did not die during Dostoevsky.
Right.
Really did alter the facts, but got away with it. I think maybe he was writing about, you know, his own great grief at the death of his own son.
Right, it was a way for him to get to anguish by attaching another character to it. But I mean, in a sense, it's not so. It's just a different way of. I remember in your memoir talking about when you wrote Becoming Jane Eyre, that you imagined that your sister who returns and returns to you was Emily Bronte to your Charlotte. And in Dreaming for Freud, which is about Dora and Freud's examination of Dora, you know there's an identification there. So you're not changing the facts, but for your own purposes, you're using an historical or a factual story to tell a version of your truth.
Yes, that's true. And I think the important thing there is to find the right distance, right? To find the right distance from the character on the page. You can't be too close. You can't just, you know, I mean, my initial attempt at writing a novel, I think I wrote it in 3 months. And it was about my sister's death, but it was a novel. I wrote it and I sent it off and was promptly turned down, of course. And I actually dared to call the publisher and say, "Why did you turn my book down?" And the lady, the kind lady, and it was some big house, I don't even remember which house it was, and she was nice enough to say, "Well, it wasn't good enough, my dear." She said, "How could it have been? How long did it take you?" And blah, blah. And so I said, "Well, yes, maybe, yeah." So, you know, I wanted to just splash my soul on the page. You can't do that. You need to find the way of taking some distance, however you do it. Yeah.
Well, the fact that you had written so many novels before you arrived at the form of memoir to, as I said, tell it straight. After, I mean, that's so. You're talking about you wrote the novel when you know what 30 years before you wrote the memoir, right?
Yes.
So it's the same material, but it took that long to find the distance to be able to determine.
Yes. And
how
then
to write it.
Yes, and then a lot of people were very cross with me.
That's another story that actually I'd be very interested to hear about. But let me just see if there's more questions. Can you talk about the title, Sheila, Open Secrets, and how you arrived at it?
Talk about what?
Open Secrets. How did you arrive at the title?
The title, yes. I have to admit I had a lot of help with that. I was trying various things, and that was really, I think, I suggested it amongst many other things, Secrets Revealed, or I don't know, various. But I did want to write about that, about secrets that are finally revealed, and what that does, and how liberating in a way that could be if you could just, put it down and say it like it is. Yeah. So, yeah. And although it obviously is a title that has been used, and not that long ago, by Alice Munro's wonderful book of short stories.
Right. But the title works a couple of ways too, as well, right? It works a few ways in the sense that that the secrets aren't open at all, and that the characters don't move forward until they do. Yeah.
Right.
So one last question is on the screen here. Somebody's asking us what we're reading to escape from this thing, but to make it specific to Sheila, somebody asks, would you talk about sisters in your work? Would you talk a bit about mothers in your work? And now I'm going to close the question thing.
Yes. Oh, yes. I talked a lot about mothers in my work too, and in my memoir, my mother obviously was very important. And an
indelible character.
Yes, and she's in the book that I'm writing at the moment, with a lot of bracelets, bangles, gold bracelets that are jingling and jangling. She was a lively lady. She was a lovely lady. And I'm very grateful to her for giving me the possibility of, having a certain amount of freedom on the page. I think that's where that comes from. Just that, you take the chance. Yeah.
And what are you reading, Sheila, at the moment? I know you're reading Don Quixote.
Pandemic, I do recommend Don Quixote. It's very long, and it's very funny, and it's also about madness, and I think this COVID has made us, because we're so isolated, many of us are living alone, completely alone, and just, with only this way of, communicating through Zoom. It's almost like madness, a kind of isolation that has been thrust upon us. Yeah. So I think I recommend that. And so wonderful books. Yes, I'm thinking of doing Madame Bovary too, maybe with the group who might want to be interested.
Oh, well, Madame Bovary would be a wonderful one. So you must look up Seduction and Betrayal, because, of course,
Thank you.
There's also a very famous essay by Blackmure on Madame Bovary, and that would be wonderful, Sheila. You can read it in French to your participants as well.
So, Sheridan, thank you so much for doing this. You're wonderful. You came up with wonderful questions, and you read the book so carefully.
Wonderful to see you. It's wonderful to see you, and thank you, everybody. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Center for Fiction.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you both. That was such a wonderful, rich conversation, and thank all of you for joining us. And don't forget to purchase the book, or you can call the bookstore and pick it up there if you prefer to get it fast. All right. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye, Sheila. Bye.
Hope to see you. Hope we can have